Justin Thomas Kay is our guest today. He's a creative director and graphic designer based in Brooklyn, here in Greenpoint, a neighbor. Originally from Milwaukee, he's worked at pretty much every cool magazine that's ever existed: Complex, Fader, New York Times Magazine, Mass Appeal, Victory Journal, and a couple companies you've heard of: Apple, Red Bull, RGA, and has a career over 20 years in design and at this really fun intersection of music and sports and culture. Early 2024, he opened up his own studio. And one of the things I'm most excited to talk to him about today is his new GQ Sports show that's on YouTube called Rebranded, where he's doing rebrands of sports teams. He did the Clippers, did the Chiefs, and I think it's really fucking awesome. And I think it's the new hot ones for me.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to start the show now and talk to Justin. Let's go right into it. So the show is called Rebranded.
Yes.
It's GQ Sports.
Yes.
And you're the star. You're the Sean Evans. You're
Apparently, allegedly. Yeah, maybe somewhat begrudgingly.
So how did that happen? Or let's take us back.
I mean, somewhat related, I guess, to just my CV, just to like get that out of the way, is I started my career in editorial. So
Okay.
I did that for about a decade. And the last magazine that I had worked for was The Fader. I was the creative director of The Fader for 2.5 years.
Got The Fader.
And an alumni of The Fader before my time, Will Welch, is now the editorial mastermind behind the modern version of GQ. Someone on his team had pitched the idea of this rebranded thing, and Will just mentioned, hey, you should hit up Justin, which was awesome. Yeah, they got in touch with me. And, once I kind of like was able to have that initial conversation of, like, what kind of show do you want to do? Like, okay, GQ talking about logos. Like when they hit me up initially, I was like, oh, is this going to be like a fashion spin on like the rebrand thing, which, to be totally honest, I'm glad it's not, because I think fashion, there's stories in those logos, but obviously sports is so rich and is so tied to just like culture in general. It's just, there's a lot more to talk about and a lot more to investigate there.
And so the general concept, they came to you, which was each episode, you're going to take a sports team and sort of do a bit of a history lesson, which I really like, is sort of going back and looking at the old logos and some of the old memorabilia and just pieces that you would do as a designer going into a project. We'll get into the Bucks and some of the projects you've done, but that is part of the show as well. It's a bit of an education. And then you rebrand it in sort of under 20 minutes.
Yeah. And, it rebrand in whatever version that means. Like the first episode with the Clippers, that was topical because that logo had just launched. It was the beginning of the NBA season. And that's part of the goal too, is to make it so that each episode is tied to a relevant moment.
Oh, really?
And that was part of the reason behind Kansas City. For the second episode, which was very tough. We were talking NFL, trying to figure out what team to do. Much different challenge than an NBA team, and NFL teams generally like rebrand with much less frequency than NBA teams. A lot of NBA teams, they rebrand on a semi-regular basis, or there's a lot of new teams in the mix that need new brands. So that was hard. Also, just like Kansas City's a golden goose. Like, what do you do with that? So I enjoyed the challenge of that when they brought that to me. It's a collaborative process of trying to figure out like what sport we're going to do, what team we're going to do. And so once we settled on Kansas City and that sort of like hit me, it took a minute to figure out like, okay, well, like, what do you do with that? Like there's a pretty like cool history behind why the team looks the way they do, which I got into in the episode. And with that, I started to sort of tease out, it was more about these inconsistencies and how I would approach that, as opposed to just like, oh, let's just scrap this so I can put my stamp on it, which is, to be honest, for me personally, is my like least favorite form of design that anyone can do. Yeah,
you respect what's there and the culture and the connection that people have. And I think that's the most important part of sports. Branding is it's you can't just burn it down and start fresh. You have decades and people that have tattoos all over their bodies, and it's like they are not looking for change.
Yeah, I mean, and look, like the third one, I'm kind of laughing. I don't want to mention what it's going to be because I don't know when this is going to come out, but that one is going to be a little bit more of a provocation.
Wow, more than the Chiefs.
More than the Chiefs, because the Chiefs, at the end of the day, it was more about like how do you kind of like tighten some things that had gotten loose over time, because that identity was built pre photostat even. It was like put together so long ago. So part of this next one was just to like, self brief a more borderline how can I say this, like untouchable sports institution. Wow. And what would you do with that if you were given that brief?
Oh, that's going to get the people going.
Yeah.
That comment section is going to be hot.
It's going to be blown up. I mean, whatever. The Kansas City one blew up. It also just like gave me a reminder based on my like old like editorial background of how many people hate follow these editorial platforms. Like, and I told everyone at GQ, I was like, you guys must just ignore your comment section like as hard as you can, because like it was crazy. They did a share post and just people saying the craziest stuff, like in their own like therapy session, in the comment section. Like there was one person who I'm just going to blow them up right now, where they were like, I can't even get a job as an art director, blah, 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 and they were like using like my video as a vehicle to like for therapy for themselves. It was like, all right, man, like do your thing, brother.
Chill out, man. Like, I know. Yeah. I mean, I watched a video and I loved it, right? This is like right down center lane for me as a person who loves sports, who loves design. And I ate up the content, and I love the history, and I love the sort of rebrand of it all. I just am so glad that a show like this exists, and that there's a platform and also an audience for it. Yeah. And then I went to the comment section, because as soon as I'm done, I'm like, I want to see what people think of this. And then my favorite one, which I'll read to you, is from a guy named Rumby KCC, which I'm going to warn you, he has the Kansas City Chiefs logo in his.
Yeah. Also, I want to hop out in front of this. Chiefs fans are some of the biggest babies. Some of the biggest babies on the internet.
Oh yeah,
Kevin's a Bengals.
Yeah. Second to Bears fans. I'm required to say that as a Packers shareholder.
So, and sports fans just hate change. Like they just do not want. You cannot win.
Yeah, it's a lose-lose.
I'm clear-eyed what I'm getting into with this whole thing. Like for
do you have thick skin?
Yeah, generally, thick enough that, to be honest, like when the Kansas City thing launched, I haven't read the comments on YouTube at all. I read the comments on Clippers for a minute at the beginning, because it was more out of like curiosity. I just wanted to see how it was received generally. And that one went well. I knew Kansas City was going to be a lot more contentious. And so I just kind of like, I let it rock.
Because that one, the Clippers one is new, so people don't have a connection to it. And I think people hated that one. And we actually talked about it a lot on the show, because, as two sports fans doing a design podcast, when we get a story like that, Clippers rebrands, it's got ships and the nautical, everything in it. We're like, let's talk about this. Is a good topic for us to talk about. Yeah. The Chiefs, people not looking for it. And, but we don't need to read them. But yeah, mostly they're just like, was someone drunk trying to draw a logo? It's like, Justin is right here, in the video, not drunk, very clearly, beautifully expressing and designing and teaching you and showing you why he made the decisions that he made, which
I mean, and look, like if I can just hop in there, I mean, like the the thing that like overall I don't care. Like whether people like it or not. Like also like for me, it's sort of like the beauty and the difficulty of doing branding specifically outside of like design as like a broader challenge. Cause like I do a lot of marketing work. I do some like formal advertising work. My work spans different things, but the thing with branding is like, you are just making a series of decisions at specific moments. And then at a certain point, that shit just has to go live on its own. Totally. And you have to feel confident that you're making the right decisions for the moment that you made them. And anyone else who wants to, or would get that same job, they can make their own decisions that are right for them in that moment. And like, honestly, for me, it's like, that's like part of the beauty of this whole thing is it's all like this like very participatory thing, and anyone at any moment can have a good idea for a brand. And I don't even like, I can't even stand behind everything I've done and been like, that's the be all end all answer for all this stuff. It's like, no, like I just made a decision.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I do say that quite a bit, where I'm like, is it perfect? No, but it's done, and it's done for now. And that doesn't mean it can't change in 6 months, a year, 2 years from now. But it at some point we made 100 1,000 decisions
Yes.
over the course of the past few 6 months, 10 months, whatever.
Yeah.
And this is where we got to, and this is where it is today.
Exactly.
And I think that's exciting. I think, again, just like, I mean, the internet plus sports design, like there's a no-win scenario, which I think in some ways, if you go in, or at least are like starting from a place of like, this is going to get torn apart no matter what I do, then I think it alleviates some of the potential feeling bad about it at all. You shouldn't. It's awesome. It's so fucking cool. Like, the show is incredible.
Like, I think that's also just the nature of being a creative person and putting something artful out into the world, whatever form that's in, whether it's like music or branding or advertising or whatever it is, your output, theater, like anything like that. There's all like a kind of like a performative aspect to all of this stuff, where it's like, I mean, performative also another layer when I'm like literally on camera talking to people about this stuff.
How do you find that part of it? Do you enjoy that? You seem very natural. I'll just say that.
Credit where it's due to the team at GQ that's doing it, like Cole Evlev, who is the in-house GQ like video maestro. He directs all the stuff. He and I collaborate very closely throughout kind of like the pre-pro process. We are working on a deck today for the next episode.
Sick.
And in the room, he understands design. He understands like the visual world that all this stuff comes from. And it was his idea for the show. So it's a very like kind of like me and him one-on-one process, and it makes it really, really natural. I mean, and in a past life, I was a teacher. I taught at the Cooper Union for a little bit. And I wish I could still do that. I wish I still had time for it, but it's a gnarly commitment. And I've got 2 kids at home outside of running the studio. And it's just, I don't have the time for it. So this is sort of like my way of, I guess, like leaning into that.
I love it. And, YouTube University, baby. That's, teach the kids.
Exactly.
And I will say the top comment says, even if not everyone agrees on the rebrand in the comments, I love the style of video. Keep them coming. So shout out to that
Absolutely.
guy.
That's great.
That's my feeling as well.
Yeah.
It's like, whether you like it or not, it does not matter. But this is content for people like me. And
it's just an awesome breakdown of like how you make these decisions and why you would make them.
Exactly.
Sweet.
Exactly.
And it's so smart. And I think what I want to do on your behalf is send them the Milwaukee Bucks rebrand to every person that hates and be like, this was done very quickly for a show. Yeah. Like, if given at least 3 times this amount of time, look what Justin can do. Look at this amazing branding project. So,
did that have any haters, or is that the most well-received sports rebrand of all time?
Well, I mean, to be totally clear, the Milwaukee Bucks project. I'm from Milwaukee. I have a million close ties to a lot of different ways that project came to life. That actually came through the studio at Doubleday and Cartwright through one of the partners, Kimu Meyer.
Shout out to Kimu.
Kimu, one of the all-time greats, huge friend of mine outside of me having worked for him. He had 1 degree of separation from the son of the guy who bought the Bucks.
Wow.
Who is this like a New York hedge fund billionaire. What ended up happening is once that came through, and there was this idea of like, we can like pitch on what initially was just going to be a jersey design project. The studio just went whole hog,
totally,
and was just like, but like, what if you rebrand, and then we do this new logo, and they were like, all right, cool, let's do it. However, it's due in 2 weeks because we have to hit jersey deadlines. So the Bucks project really was like probably about like a month top to bottom outside of like the guideline build, but it was to hit the jersey deadlines. It was, again, like that was directed by Kimu, and then my role in that, I was a managing creative director of Doubleday at the time, as I was, more or less like, aside from doing some design, overseeing the team and trying to like help like steer the ship as like the Sherpa of Milwaukee.
Yeah, for sure.
So like when that came through, I was like, all right, so first thing off the bat, we can definitely redraw the deer, which had gotten like totally messed up over time.
Yeah.
Let's please not go retro with the purple. Let's like, I could like help steer people in a couple interesting directions. And then we were blessed that we had like at the time that collection of people at Doubleday, it was like there was like a crazy pile of talent, and we had like devoted basically the whole studio on it because we knew it was going to hit. And then me being able to steer the Milwaukee angle. that really like I think helped to make sure that thing just like landed right.
It's a perfect storm of the right people in the right place. And I worked at Coke around this time, and I remember meeting Chris and Kimu, and I brought them in for Powerade, which is a sports check that I was
that's
working on.
right. Yeah.
And just insanely jealous of the Milwaukee Bucks work, and just being a sports fan that's like top dream goal is to do a major core four sports team, and to
especially
do it
the hometown.
Yeah. So for you
crazy.
though, like, was that a dream job? Are you a sports fan? Or
I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, like we were going back to Milwaukee for in-person meetings, and then we go back for the launch, and I'm getting like interviewed on local news by like a sportscaster I had been watching since I was like 7 years old. And like, but it probably included one of my like all-time like bag fumbles that shows my complete lack of like press training, which was we're in the press conference. There's like all of these people that are also like flying in for the reveal, you know, like people from ESPN and like national news outside of just like local Milwaukee stuff. And you know, like someone, you know, kicks a question to me of like, you know, like my family's history of like Bucks fandom. Wow. And I just like short circuit. And like, I'm like, well, yeah, my family, we weren't really like Bucks fans. We were more of a Packer household.
Oh my God.
I was like, fuck. It was like immediately knew I was like terrible answer, and like everyone in the room though like definitely gave me grace. Like I think they could tell I was like nervous and
like, who invited this graphic designer to this?
Luckily, Chris swooped in and saved the day on that one. He had a pretty good follow up. Thank God.
And as Kevin said, like these projects are universally hated day one.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who the team is. It doesn't matter what if the rebrand is a perfect job, they're just, people are going to say no, like just instinctually 100%. Hate it. And I don't think that happened with the Bucks. I genuinely believe that as far as where I can see, it was something that people were excited about.
Well, I think they were in pretty rough shape, right? Like just visually that those, the end of that crazy era was pretty bad.
Yeah, it had gotten like really, really messed up. And also like, you know, one thing you have to remember at that time, that was sort of like the end of the Adidas era of the NBA.
Oh yeah.
And so I think, you know, what you realize very quickly, like for how much like people want to like slag on Nike now, which to me is just like so tired. It's just like whatever, like a bunch of like armchair, like financial, like channel. LinkedIn, whatever, like specialists on like why Nike's failing. It's like Nike isn't failing. Like Nike came into the NBA and like immediately upgraded it, and it looks sick. Like the jerseys are dope. Like they know exactly what they're doing with this stuff. And like, but we hit this weird sweet spot. So again, like I think why that job hit the way it did and why it was so successful is we were in that in between. Adidas is wrapping, Nike hadn't picked up yet. So all we had to do was just like get all of our ideas approved by the ownership. It was almost like you were redesigning like the bodega at the end of the street.
Really?
Like it was so easy. It was just like, do you like the logo? Cool. NBA is like, we don't care. Like if ownership's down, let's do it.
I'll also say too, 2015, which is now a decade ago, I do think graphic design and branding, sort of a more modern approach being brought to sports, wasn't totally happening quite yet.
Yeah.
And Doubleday and Cartwright, obviously an agency that does work with Red Bull and Nike and, you know, really understands branding, also really understands sport, is bringing an edge that a lot of sports branding still doesn't have. Like you talk about the Chiefs or these brands that just like they were created a million years ago. They don't touch them and everything looks exactly as it was.
100%.
And no one will ever change it because 100%. The fans will murder. But I do think there's a sensibility. And I think that's still like when I talk about sports branding, I talk about the Bucks and I talk about the Jazz as teams that are bringing sort of a new freshness that like agencies and, you know, in our world would love to bring to all teams.
100%. I mean, and look, like I think a lot of decisions are made in sports. I mean, and this is just like a broad categorical generalization, so apologies in advance to anyone who works in sports creative that might be listening to this, but like honestly for me, it's like I look at a lot of this stuff, what the teams are doing, it's like it's almost like fear-based. There's like an idea of like, oh, we can't change, or if we do, we need to move the needle in this way, or like, so what happens is you end up with these sort of like half steps where like a lot of times like people will make changes that are like either too big, and it's a little like stumbly, or you just end up like what happened with the Bucks, where it just kind of like slowly evolved over time. But what really happened is it just got like more and more broken until we were just like, let's just like wipe the slate clean. We know we need to have a Buck. But beyond that, like
That's
what
also
else?
a
What else can we do?
basketball.
You know? So yeah.
Also, it didn't hurt that they won the championship, right?
Yes.
Like what,
Yeah, that
5
was
years
pretty-
after that, or
That was
I don't
pretty
know.
cool.
That probably felt pretty good too to see like
Definitely.
championship
Yes.
team playing, because of course I was an intern back in the day for the New York Knicks, and I remember back then being like, this is very fun, obviously a dream job, but the truth of the matter is if the Knicks suck, the fandom is going to be upset.
Yes, yes.
And no graphic design is going to save that. And I think with the Bucks, new branding, but also new energy, you know, Giannis,
100%.
like, it sort of comes together in a really fun way.
Yeah.
Also,
Perfect storm.
all due respect to Michael Duray, the designer of the original Knicks logo, legend.
I was going to ask you where you stand on it, because I, you know, he is a legend, and that logo is legendary. I very controversially said that I think it's time to maybe
Might be.
it just feels dated to me, and I'm a
Yeah.
super fan of the team.
Yeah.
We blew the game last night to the fucking Warriors. Curry put us to sleep, and but it just. Again, that's me as a dreamer being like, that's the Mount Rushmore project.
Yeah.
And I think it could be done.
Yeah.
Do you agree, or what do you think?
I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
they can all be done, you know, like I said, like this next episode of GQ, I think is going to be a good example of that.
Does it scale? Does it feel modern?
100%.
Does it could,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I
it feels
think,
very,
you know, when I talk about like all due respect to like Michael Duray, the legend who made it, it's like I'm also might be butchering the way you say his name, but like the idea that he conceptualized and drew that out by hand, and like the thought process that like went into kind of like when you see the work, like the book that was put together by the Letterform Archive of all his work is gorgeous, and like it goes in depth on the Knicks stuff, and it's awesome to see that. But again, all this stuff is touchable. It's all up for grabs. Like I don't care. Like every logo's up for grabs.
Even the
as far as
Packers?
I'm concerned.
even the Packers. Yeah.
Even the Packers.
Yeah, let's update that boring ass G. Too long.
That's, I mean, we had talked about some other teams when we were talking NFL. I mean, also because to be clear, at the time we had no idea what the Super Bowl was going to look like, obviously. So, you know, we were like, oh, do we do the Steelers? Do we do like, who do we do? And it was really hard. It was really hard because so many NFL teams are also based in these like visuals that are so connected to the birth of the team, as opposed to NBA, where like the whole NBA has gone through all these like crazy eras of reinvention.
Should pitch the Bengals. They could use that B is pretty atrocious.
Yeah.
The don't touch the helmet though. The helmet.
Oh
is
no,
No, the
helmet
helmet's sick.
stays. Helmet
Yeah.
stays.
Is there a team that's on your sort of Mount Rushmore, or like that you would like, you think needs it, that like you would love to get your hands on? Obviously, you're thinking about this now with the show. I imagine.
I mean, at this point, to be honest, like I don't know that I maybe the show's ruined that for me a little bit. Like I don't have like a Mount Rushmore of like what I want to do. Yeah. Also, actually, maybe is like getting to work on the Bucks kind of like nullified that a little bit. It's hard to really think about what else I would want to do. But like, what's more interesting to me actually is working with the GQ team to really figure out like with this next episode, like what is a different way to have this conversation. And that for me is interesting. And also like, I mean, whatever, like the beauty of that show is it's all like self-briefed. I don't have a client.
Yeah, exactly. And what you decide is the answer. Is the answer.
Exactly.
Which is the dream opportunity
Yeah.
and project. I mean, is there a world where you're thinking in the back of your head, like maybe there's a world where the team will see this and be like interested in engaging in branding?
To kind of like reveal behind the curtain a little bit on like the rebrands of these teams, the thing that like is hard to really kind of like, I don't know, like really express is that the budgets that these teams have to rebrand is basically non-existent. Yeah. So like at the core of basically every pro sports team is a small mom and pop operation that doesn't look much different than like a family restaurant in, you know, like any random town. And where they get their money is marketing and partnerships with brands like Nike or whoever, but at the core, it's such an interesting world because that like brand, that initial brand that gets built, like they don't have Nike budgets for that stuff. So I think that's also why a lot of times these teams like either like they can make weird missteps or they don't change even when they should.
Yeah.
So it makes it kind of like an interesting thing where it's like you're never even going to have like a single Nike seasonal campaign level budget to rebrand a sports team. Like that just doesn't exist.
And I think that's part of the kind of not appeal, but I feel like that's part of the fun part about, in my mind, sports branding, where it's like it isn't like this high gloss sort of fast moving sort of industry. It still feels nascent and like that the same, like you go to Expo West and like all these brands are so, so much design has been infused into every startup and every sort of product. And, you look at these kind of like sort of, slow moving ancient sort of brands that they have what everyone wants, which is a deep connection with their consumer, the audience.
Yeah.
So why chase great, perfect design when they have a meaningful, audience?
Yeah. I mean, it's like I'm trying to think of how I can say this without like having an opinion that makes people not want to hire me, but like it's
welcome
like
to the show.
It's sort of like the opposite of the kind of like the Silicon Valley effect on the design world. It like the way the sports world operates is like the opposite of that. Like it's like, I feel like what happened is like over the course of my career, like the tech industry and startup culture and all this stuff, it hit the design world. All of these like crazy monopoly money budgets went into rebrands. They all got like thrown onto salaries and all of this stuff that just kind of like, into my mind, I think we're kind of like witnessing a little bit of like the deflating of that.
Sure.
Where it was just like it was all clearly like fake, and we were all like participating in it to a certain degree. But like what's interesting about sports is it's been this like evergreen, very like grassroots, like person to person way of like communicating with the community. That like that's just, I mean, that's what makes it so fun.
Yeah, and the season ticket holders are like legitimately like, those are like the closest, biggest, fans, and they have like real human relationships. That's what one of the things I was shocked by when I worked at the Knicks was like they do so many events for these season ticket holders, and like you think like, oh my God, in New York City, how many people? It's like, no, it's really, not that many people, and they actually have a relationship with them. It is very 100%. Much like a family run business.
It really is.
And it's I think that's what's beautiful about it, though.
No, it's cool. I mean, like, look, like I ended up connecting with the in-house creative director for the Chiefs, and we exchanged some like nice messages back and forth. And like, he's a cool dude. He's doing some great stuff. Like if you look at kind of like all the creative around what that team is doing, it's awesome. And he was, and it seemed like things were generally well received on his end. So nobody there was like greatly offended by anything that I had pointed out.
More offended by Patrick Mahomes and his Super Bowl performance. But no, that's cool. And I think it's cool also that like, obviously there are some teams that are investing much more in design and like content, because all these brands, we talk a lot about sports on the show. So finally we could talk about it with a good reason. But it's like, I'm a big documentary guy. So I watch Hard Knocks and I watch like Full Swing and I watch all these like Netflix-y sports docs and 30 for 30s, all these things. And now each team is like making their own documentary content. They have a team of designers making Instagram posts for like, game stuff. So it is, slowly they are investing or at least prioritizing design. I don't know if that necessarily means like full scale rebrands, but
there's interesting stuff, like I would say Major League Baseball is doing a ton of great work in general. Like a lot of the teams are really like pumping out some cool stuff like what you're talking about. And there's certain teams like the Twins, for example, that have invested in kind of like interesting creative for a long time. There's definitely like a priority that's put on that stuff, but there is that like interesting bifurcation of kind of like the brand side versus a marketing side. And like, I think I've always struggled with that in my career because I always just view that as like the same conversation. I know there's like distinct challenges there, but I think like you have to look at like marketing is brand is marketing. Like this stuff all feeds into each other. And I think that as much as you can close that loop, that's like when the stuff is successful.
Totally. And you mentioned before, I worked at some magazines. I think you've worked at every cool company that's ever made a magazine. Complex, Fader, New York Times Magazine, Mass Appeal, Victory Journal. I'm sure I'm missing some others.
There's a bunch of other ones from like that are a little more like I freelanced or I was in and out. I was at Teen Vogue for a little while. Shout out to Teen Vogue. And man, like what else? I did a couple issues of InStyle Weddings randomly. One of my first gigs in New York City, and this was actually probably like one of the more like instructive things where like I really learned the foundation of design, is I worked for a small studio called Helicopter. This was in 2004. I started working with Helicopter and they did magazine redesigns. So the founders of Helicopter had come up with the idea for Domino magazine. Okay. Which, you know, now seems super dated, but like once upon a time was a pretty like revolutionary way of like constructing an editorial experience. They brought in like the voice of the writers through handwriting and whatever. It was just like a really like interesting approach to making a magazine. And so there, you know, I did like a rebrand of Car Driver and a rebrand of Jane magazine, and we would build the templates and then I would go in-house and we would work with the team to implement everything. And so a lot of the foundations of my career and the way that I think are still built on that idea of like magazine making and the editorial process, which is really just like, to my mind, means like collaborating with and working with people who are like the best in their individual category and not feeling like I need to be the person who can do all of this stuff.
Do you want to teach Kevin about Cork Express? Do you want to, you know, he's very young. He probably has never even opened it.
I'm not that young.
Kevin,
I have
go with the
evacuated Cork Express from my brain.
Oh, you don't want to talk about it? But yeah, I mean, magazine, I remember when I went to college, obviously studying design, it's like, you know, editorial was like the thing. Obviously magazine culture and being a designer, that was one of the main jobs you can get. And so
totally.
How many magazines were you like on deadline trying to like lay out 100 pages?
My God. I mean, that was where I started, you know, I mean, especially Complex, like at that time it was cool. Complex was like the perfect mix of like zine making with like people who actually understood magazines. So it was this really interesting dichotomy where like on one hand it felt more like you know, I'm making like Ego Trip or a graffiti magazine, but then on the other hand it's like they were hiring all these interesting people who had kind of like a deep bench of editorial experience. So that was like a big place where like I cut my teeth and I really started getting into like expressive typography, and they let me like do my thing with that. So I would just like vomit.
Complex still has a pretty, you know, a really important place in culture. But back at that moment, they had the game in a chokehold. And what was it like working? Did you work with like Mark Echo and like, you know, in that sort of formative Complex era? I imagine crazy, right?
Yeah, it was awesome. I mean, like, you know, for me I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I remember like going to the graffiti shop in like 1996 and like getting like the first drop of Echo gear, and like, so then being able to like fast forward, like move to New York and like work with, you know, the whole team. And I, you know, Mark at that point was actually like a little less involved. He gradually got like more involved as time went on. But it was amazing just being around that environment. And like still to this day, like most of my like best friends in the city were all like Echo Unlimited extended universe, which is very weird. But that's just,
do you have any crazy Mark Echo stories? Cause I have one. I'll tell it after if you got one.
I honestly, I don't really like have anything like so crazy other than just like I think that like the craziest experience was actually when Complex had moved. We were in the garment district in this like weird shitty building on 38th Street when I first started there. We eventually moved to 23rd above the Home Depot in the Flatiron district. The office that we had was where they filmed Big.
Okay.
Like, you know, like when he gets like the fake job and like that and the ad agency or whatever it was. My desk was actually the desk that when Tom Hanks like whips around the corner and like and knocks that person's like papers all over the place. Like that was where I sat. So that was pretty cool.
That rocks.
Yeah, but beyond that, whatever, it was just like crazy Echo, like holiday parties and stuff. It was nuts.
So my story is I was working for Vitamin Water, and we were trying to sort of bring in agencies and bring in fresh thinkers and trying to rethink some of our marketing. And Mark Echo comes in to a meeting full of like Coca-Cola executives. It's just him and Emily Oberg. She's wearing like, Sporty and Rich, probably sampled #1. And he comes in and he's like, I'm going to build Comic-Con for streetwear. And he was like, it's going to be massive. There's going to be brands everywhere. He's like, it's a vision. It's going to be Disney World. And literally everyone was like, yeah, right. This dude is on drugs. And he seemed so crazy. I remember it was just like so silent. Everyone was just like, it was one of the most uncomfortable moments of my career. I was just like, I think I even maybe started like a slow clap, like just because it was just so strange.
Yeah, like super
because he was so passionate about it. And he was like, Vitamin Water could be the main presenting sponsor. And it's like, it's going to be Complex Con. And we're like, all right, dude, sounds cool. And then now Complex Con is legitimately
I know.
one of the most important things.
Honestly, I think like Mark's claim to fame and like why I think like so many of us feel like we owe him so much is that like, he is just like the great assembler of people. He's enthusiastic, he believes, and he like puts himself into that belief, and he just really like did whatever he could to make Echo succeed, and it did, and it's had all these crazy lives, and it's now been like sold, and like there's licenses, and he's now back involved, and like it's like there's going to be a rebirth, obviously, because like the Zoomers love Echo again, as evidenced by Billie Eilish wearing it on stage, and like
that's right, yeah.
It's just it's like he just had like an understanding of like media and marketing and advertising. He was like way ahead of the game in so many different ways. Like, it's nuts.
I think about that moment a lot.
Yeah.
I'm just like, he had such clarity and vision, and he had nothing to really show for it. It was not like it didn't have a venue, didn't have a real plan, but it was something he was dreaming, and something I really, admire. And, I think the commitment to the hat, that sort of is also worth, sort of giving him some credit for. Also, he worked for the Fader,
yes.
John Cohen, Rob Stone, like sort of just an institution in music.
Yeah, totally.
What
I mean,
that
was, like in the spectrum of like magazines, that was like visually was like one of the pinnacles. That was a magazine I had always wanted to work for. And then my roommate at the time, Matthew Schnipper, he had just gotten a job at the Fader while we were living together. He's a really super talented writer and editor. I had gotten to like meet some of the people who were working there. And at the time there was this guy, Pete Mesha, who was editor in chief. And he just offered. He was like, yeah, if you want to like come on and like help switch things up over here. And, this was, 2009, 2010 when I started talking to him. It was interesting. There was like not really like any semblance of like a magazine as brand at the time. Yeah. Like even Complex, like at that time, like Complex, like the website was like kind of popping off, but like not really. It was still pretty early in the game. There was like obviously like no YouTube shows or anything like that. And at the time, when I came in, what I told John and Rob is I was like, yeah, I want to do this, but like I want to do everything. Like I want to be able to do the magazine, the website, the events. This has to be like Fader, the brand. Yeah. And kind of like through that process at the Fader, like obviously getting to work with the amazing bench of photographers that they had, and like some free reign to like rethink the page architecture and the website and everything. Like I just started to understand what a brand is, and kind of like accidentally then I was like, oh, I bet this is what being at an agency is like. And then after that, I just started to read the writing on the wall with magazines, and I was like, all right, I don't want to like help all these people.
What happened to magazines?
Oh no, they're great. They're awesome. I just got tired of trying to like figure out how to like make weird PDF interactive magazines. And like
I had this conversation the other day. They should do more interactive articles online. I feel like articles still are quite one-dimensional, and like New York Times every now will fucking break out some sort of very cool editorial experience, taking advantage of the fact that it can move and do cool things. But I still think it's pretty standard. And
it is. I mean, I think there was like a sweet spot in the middle where New York Times, like they launched Snowfall, which was obviously like it was like a big interactive story. And I think in the editorial world that really shook things up, and everyone was like, oh, magazines can, or, like editorial online can feel interesting and different.
I want to look it up. I don't know what that is.
It was, I think it was called
Snowfall.
Snowfall. I think, was it Snowfall? Snow something.
Yes. How it changed journalism. Right.
Yeah. And it really like kind of like changed the game. But then like what you realize is how much money it takes,
how much work it is
to put
make
that stuff
things
on the internet. And, someone like the Fader, we never had that. But the Fader's claim to fame was like, they had the Fader Ford at South by Southwest. Yeah. They had all these like sick events. It was like there was a different thing in the mix there that like different brands like Nike or whatever would want to get involved in. And we did a great collaboration for the World Cup with Nike. And sort of like through that process, I think that was when the brand thing really started to click, where I was like, all right, I think this is what I want to do. And that was also like the heyday of brands like Nike wanting to do editorial products.
Yeah, and it's so cool that like your work seems to just kind of find this like convergence of sports and music and culture, and it's something that you've done now for 20 plus years, and it's pretty amazing. Obviously, Apple, Red Bull, you've kind of done in-house, you've done the agency side, and before we move off of music to talk about what you're doing now, we got to talk about 2014 Forest Hills Drive. J. Cole went triple platinum with no features.
Yes, he did.
And you did the art direction and the creative. And, so tell me about that. How did that happen?
That was awesome. I mean, it was a really super collaborative experience with Cole. Like he's an awesome dude. He really was like personally super involved in everything related to that process. We initially had a more like heavily illustrated thing that we were trying to do, but the narrative around it got really like complicated and hard to figure out how to make it land. And it was getting to be like crunch time just to like make the album happen. And so, like really just kind of like pitched this idea of like, hey, let's just like go to Fayetteville with you. He was going to be buying his childhood home. And what if we just like treat this like a journalistic exercise of like going to like meet people that were like important to you when you were growing up, and going to these different places in your childhood and revisiting them at the time when you're buying this home. And he eventually bought the home and then was like subsidizing people being able to like live there. And it was the whole like idea of it was like really, really cool. And he really believed in it. And so it was just me, photographer, photo tech. We flew down to Fayetteville. We spent like 4 days there, just like driving around with him, went to like the roller skating rink that he worked at when he was a teenager, and nobody there knew he was showing up. So Cole just rolls up, and it was incredible. It wasn't just like kids geeking out. There were like all these like older people that knew him when he was a kid that still go there to skate constantly. So it was like, that was just like the vibe of the whole trip, was us just like roaming around with him, and he gave us great access. And the cover was ultimately his idea.
Cool.
Like
iconic.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah. It reminds me of Eminem, like kind of that sort of just like the story is, in the photos. And again, like I can see the connection to Fader, right?
Yeah.
Where the photography was so.
And credit to Anthony Blasco, who took all those photos. Legend. We worked with him a ton at Doubleday and Cartwright, close friend of mine. He's an awesome dude, incredible photographer. And, he was just obviously the person who was going to be able to get the texture. You wanted to really like feel the life. And that was, that really came through.
Best album of his
absolutely
discography.
It's a personal favorite.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. My favorite of his for sure. So let's so pretty crazy. I was just thinking about like you did the Bucks rebrand, like one of the great design sports branding projects. J. Cole, one of the great albums of in hip hop history. Like, do you have like a full discography of other albums you've done that you don't show, and about other sports teams, or you just hit it hard once and and go?
I learned what graphic design was when I was in college, and I was in a hardcore punk band and touring around. And at the time I was going to school, thought I was going to be an illustrator. Very graciously was told by my illustration instructor that maybe I should check out the graphic design department, which I think was her way of telling me my compositions were good, but my rendering maybe not so good. She was right. But at that time, I just kind of like cut my teeth doing a bunch of stuff for bands. So I did a bunch of stuff for like Thursday and Armor for Sleep and a bunch of like funny like late 90s, early 2000s like screamy melodic hardcore bands. And then like eventually my band, we signed to Revelation Records, did that layout, and that was like my first time making like a real album. And so they started my career in music, and I mean, I guess you could say culture. But
so last year, 2024, JTK Studio.
Yeah. Put
the initials on the door.
Did.
And how long have you dreamed of kind of just doing that? I know you've had, quite a resume.
Yeah. For me, freelancing was always like a means to an end.
Sure. Sort
of like in between stuff. And I had been lucky for so much of my career to just be working with friends. So, when I was at Doubleday and Cartwright, it felt like I was working for myself. I was working with like, at the time, what felt like, like 12 of my closest friends were all sitting in this room making stuff. I had like a not as, I would say, natural run after that, when I was like kind of like meandering through trying to figure out my path. And what I think just for me became clear was like, I wanted to get back to creating in a way that just felt more artful and a little bit more individual to what I want to do, creating the kind of like balance between projects that I want to do. And I've been lucky that I've been able to do some editorial work. I do a quarterly-ish magazine for Casa Cipriani, and I have a couple other editorial projects that I'm working on. And that's aside from like, some brand work that's coming through. I do a little bit of agency work. I just like the idea of being able to be way more fluid and kind of like not even really I have to keep tabs on my own deadlines. It's just me. I don't have like a project manager or anything. At any given moment, I probably have between like 4 to 6 things going on. And I like the idea of being able to just be fluid and move around. Maybe I touch all 6 of those projects in one day. Just because I feel like it. Maybe some days I just block out for one. I just like that autonomy and being able to be selfish with it. It's been great.
Well, you're a legend, man, and someone I've looked up to in this industry, and it's just awesome to get to chat with you and hear some of the stories behind the work. And congrats on obviously an incredible career, but now a new career as a YouTube star.
YouTuber. Yes. Apparently, I'm a YouTuber now.
You are. But no, it's
put it on the website.
Yeah. For the kids at home, it takes 25 years of hard work to become an overnight success, a YouTube star. That's your goal. I
that's
think.
the goal.
Welcome to TikTok and Instagram, YouTube branding conversation.
Well, congrats to you all here, my fellow content creators.
That's right. This is going to get dozens of views on YouTube. So you'll see me in the comment section being like, "This logo sucks," but you should check out Justin's interview on Front and Center right here.
Oh yeah,
exactly. But no, I'm thrilled to see the content and truly. It's great to meet you, genuinely.
Likewise.
Thanks for coming by. Also, do you want to promote anything?
Check out GQ Rebranded. Cool. That's it.
That's the show.